The cold wind bit at Cora Sullivan's face as she pulled uselessly at the rope, her knuckles white with effort. The stubborn mule hadn't moved an inch in nearly 20 minutes, and the darkening sky promised a storm that would leave her drenched if she didn't make it to town soon. Desperation clawed at her chest as she thought of her sick father waiting in their small homestead 5 miles back. "Come on," she pleaded, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "Please, just a few more miles." The mule, appropriately named Trouble, flicked his ears back and planted his hooves more firmly into the muddy trail. Cora's shoulders slumped. The medicine she'd traveled to fetch was secured in her saddlebag, but it would do no good if she couldn't get home before nightfall. She tugged again, tears of frustration threatening to spill. Her mother had died 3 years prior, and now with her father bedridden, the burden of their struggling ranch fell entirely on her 22-year-old shoulders. The weight of responsibility felt crushing in moments like these. "Need some help with that ornery creature, madam?" The deep voice startled her. Cora whirled around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol tucked in her belt. The roads weren't safe for a woman alone, especially as the territory grew more lawless with each passing year. A tall figure sat atop a chestnut stallion about 20 paces behind her. His face was partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. A dusty duster coat hung from broad shoulders, and a worn leather gun belt encircled his waist. A cowboy, by the looks of him, and a stranger. "I'm fine, thank you," she said stiffly, though it was clear she was anything but. The man dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. As he approached, leading his horse, Cora could see his features more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. Not the hardened outlaw she'd feared, but she remained cautious nonetheless. "Wyoming Tucker," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "And I don't mean to contradict a lady, but you look like you could use a hand." The year was 1878, and Colorado Territory was no place for niceties. Still, there was something in the man's easy manner that made Cora hesitate before dismissing him outright. "Cora Sullivan," she replied after a moment, her grip relaxing on the pistol. "And this stubborn beast is Trouble." Wyoming chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to soften the cold air between them. "Aptly named, I see." He approached the mule carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones. To Cora's amazement, Trouble's ears perked forward with interest. "May I?" Wyoming asked, gesturing to the rope in her hands. Reluctantly, she handed it over. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment, and despite the chill, warmth spread up her arm. She quickly attributed it to relief that someone else was taking over the battle of wills with the mule. Wyoming ran a hand along Trouble's neck, whispering something Cora couldn't hear. Then, with gentle pressure on the rope and a click of his tongue, he began walking. Miraculously, the mule followed, plodding forward as if he'd never considered doing otherwise. "How did you?" Cora began, hurrying to catch up. Wyoming smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Animals can sense when you're frustrated or afraid. They feed off it. Sometimes all it takes is a calm hand." "I wasn't afraid," Cora said defensively, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Just in a hurry. My father's ill, and I need to get this medicine back to him." Wyoming's expression sobered immediately. "How far?" 5 miles east, near Cottonwood Creek." He nodded, handing the rope back to her. This time, Trouble didn't balk when she took hold. "I'll ride with you, if you don't mind the company. These trails aren't safe for a woman alone, especially with dark coming on." Cora's pride wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I'd be grateful." "Wyoming," he corrected with a smile. "Mr. Tucker was my father, and he's been gone these past 5 years." As they traveled, Cora found herself stealing glances at the cowboy riding beside her. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. She would have remembered those eyes, that easy smile. "You from around here?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Not exactly. I've been working cattle drives up from Texas. Just signed on with the Blackwell outfit about 20 miles west of here." "Blackwell?" Cora's stomach tightened. "Emmett Blackwell." Wyoming nodded. "You know him?" "Of him," she said carefully. "He's been buying up all the small ranches in the area, offering pennies on the dollar, then threatening those who won't sell. Wyoming's brow furrowed. I didn't know that. Most newcomers don't. He puts on a charming face for strangers. They fell silent again, but the ease between them had evaporated. Cora couldn't help but wonder if her rescuer was just another of Blackwell's men, sent to soften her up before the next offer or threat came. As if reading her thoughts, Wyoming spoke. I'm just a hired hand, Miss Sullivan. I drive cattle and break horses. Politics isn't my business. Out here, Mr. Tucker, everything is politics, she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Especially land. The first drops of rain began to fall as they crested a hill. In the distance, Cora could make out the small cabin that had been her home for all of her 22 years. Smoke curled from the chimney, a good sign that her father had managed to keep the fire going in her absence. That's it, she said, pointing. You don't need to come any further if you don't want to. Wyoming looked at the modest homestead, then at the darkening sky. Let me at least see you to your door. That rain's fixing to come down hard any minute now. True to his word, by the time they reached the cabin, the skies had opened up. They rushed the last few yards, Cora clutching the precious medicine to her chest. Wyoming quickly led Trouble and his own horse to the small lean to that served as a stable. Cora burst through the door, shaking the water from her cloak. Pa, I'm back, and I've got your medicine. Charles Sullivan lay on a narrow bed near the fireplace, his once robust frame now thin and frail. Despite his illness, his eyes lit up at the sight of his daughter. Cora girl, I was starting to worry. Had some trouble with the mule, she explained, moving to his side and uncorking the bottle the doctor had given her. But I had help getting home. As if on cue, Wyoming ducked through the doorway, removing his hat. Rain dripped from his coat onto the plank floor. Charles Sullivan's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Who's this? Wyoming Tucker, sir, the cowboy said, standing respectfully by the door. I happened upon your daughter when her mule was being obstinate. Thought it best to see her home safe with the storm coming. Cora helped her father sit up to take the medicine. He works for Blackwell, she added quietly. Charles's expression hardened. Does he now? Wyoming shifted uncomfortably. Just signed on last week. I'm not involved in any land disputes, Mr. Sullivan. The older man studied Wyoming for a long moment before nodding slightly. Well, I thank you for helping my daughter. Not many would stop for a stranger these days. It was no trouble, sir. Wyoming replaced his hat. I should be getting back before this storm gets any worse. Nonsense, Charles said, surprising both Cora and Wyoming. No man should be out in this weather. You're welcome to the hayloft in the barn for the night. Cora shot her father a questioning look, but he merely shook his head slightly. Despite his illness, Charles Sullivan was still a shrewd judge of character. If he saw something trustworthy in Wyoming Tucker, she wouldn't question it, at least not openly. That's mighty kind, sir. I'd be grateful. Cora will show you where everything is, Charles said, settling back against his pillows. The medicine was already making him drowsy, and perhaps you might lend a hand with the morning chores as payment for your lodging. Of course, Wyoming agreed readily. Cora led him back outside, the rain still coming down in sheets. They dashed to the barn, where Trouble and Wyoming's horse were already settled. Your father is a generous man, Wyoming said as they entered the relative dryness of the barn. He's a good judge of character, Cora replied, lighting a lantern. If he's letting you stay, he must see something in you that I don't. Wyoming raised an eyebrow. And what do you see, Miss Sullivan? The lantern light cast a warm glow on his features, softening the angles of his face. For a moment, Cora allowed herself to really look at him, the honest eyes, the capable hands, the way he held himself with quiet confidence rather than the swagger so many men affected. I see a man who works for Emmett Blackwell, she said finally. And that's reason enough for caution. She showed him to the ladder leading to the hayloft. There are some blankets up there. It's not much, but it's dry. I've slept in worse places, Wyoming assured her. Thank you for the hospitality, even if it comes with suspicion. Cora hesitated, feeling a twinge of guilt. Thank you for helping me today. Truly, I don't know how long I might have been stuck out there with Trouble. Wyoming smiled, and something fluttered in Cora's chest. Get some rest, Miss Sullivan. I have a feeling tomorrow will be a busy day for both of us. She nodded and turned to go, but paused at the barn door. Wyoming. Yes. What brought you to Colorado? Most Texas cowboys stay south. He was silent for so long that Cora thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, I'm looking for something. What? I'll let you know when I find it. There was a note of sadness in his voice that made Cora want to ask more, but she held her tongue. Good night, then, she said, slipping out into the rain. As she ran back to the cabin, Cora couldn't shake the feeling that Wyoming Tucker was more than just a drifting cowboy. There was a depth to him, a story untold. And despite her better judgment, she found herself wanting to know what it was. The morning dawned clear and crisp, the storm having washed away the dust and left the world feeling renewed. Cora rose before sunrise, as was her habit, and was surprised to find Wyoming already at work in the barn when she entered. You're up early, she observed, watching as he efficiently mucked out Trouble's stall. Force of habit, he replied with a shrug. On a cattle drive, you learn to rise before the sun or the trail boss makes your life miserable. Well, I appreciate the help. She picked up a pitchfork and began working alongside him. It usually takes me twice as long to get the morning chores done. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of tools and the occasional snort from the animals. Cora found herself sneaking glances at Wyoming, noting the ease with which he handled the labor and the gentle way he spoke to the animals. Your father seems a bit better this morning, Wyoming commented as they finished with the stalls. I saw him up and about when I checked on the horses earlier. The medicine helps, but it's only temporary, Cora said, her voice tight. The doctor in town says he needs to go to Denver to see a specialist, but we can't afford it. Not unless you sell the ranch, Wyoming finished for her. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Blackwell's been circling for months. His last offer would cover Pa's medical expenses, but what then? This land is all we have. Wyoming leaned on his pitchfork, studying her face. How much land do you have? 160 acres. Not much by some standards, but it's good land. Water rights to the creek, decent grazing. My grandfather homesteaded it back in '53. And you run it alone? Since Pa got sick, yes. We had to sell most of the cattle last year to pay for medicine. Now we just have a few head, the mule, and some chickens. Cora straightened her shoulders. But I manage. Wyoming nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure you do. They finished the chores and headed to the cabin for breakfast. Charles was indeed up, sitting at the small table and looking better than he had the night before. His cheeks had a hint of color, and his eyes were clearer. Morning, Pa, Cora said, kissing his forehead. You're looking stronger today. Feel it too, he replied, though the effort of sitting up clearly taxed him. Must be that fancy medicine. Or perhaps it's the company. He nodded to Wyoming, who stood respectfully by the door. Mr. Tucker was just helping with the morning chores, Cora explained, moving to the stove to prepare a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee. Call me Wyoming, please, the cowboy said, taking a seat when Charles gestured to the chair across from him. And I was happy to help. You have a fine place here. Charles studied Wyoming with shrewd eyes. Tell me, son, what does a man like Emmett Blackwell pay a cowhand these days? Pa, Cora admonished, but Wyoming held up a hand. It's a fair question, he said. $30 a month, plus room and board. Standard wage. Charles nodded. And what does he expect in return, besides moving his cattle? Wyoming met the older man's gaze steadily. If you're asking if he sent me here to pressure you into selling, the answer is no. I told you the truth yesterday. I happened upon your daughter by chance. Blackwell doesn't leave things to chance, Charles said, his voice hardening. He wants this land, and he's not above using underhanded methods to get it. Cora set bowls of mush on the table, her movements tense. She'd heard this conversation many times, but having it with one of Blackwell's men brought a new edge to her father's words. I believe you, Wyoming said simply, and I want you to know that I had no part in any of that. I'm just passing through, looking for honest work. And what are you running from? Charles asked bluntly. Wyoming's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, his easy demeanor faltered, revealing something pained beneath. What makes you think I'm running from something? Most men who drift are either running to something or away from it. You don't strike me as a man with big dreams ahead of you, so I figure you're leaving something behind. Cora wanted to chide her father for his directness, but she found herself holding her breath, waiting for Wyoming's answer. The cowboy set down his spoon and looked Charles directly in the eye. I was engaged to be married back in Texas. My fiancée died of fever 3 days before our wedding. There wasn't anything left for me there after that. The simple statement hung in the air, laden with unspoken grief. Cora felt a pang of sympathy, recognizing the shadowed look that crossed Wyoming's face, the same one she saw in her own reflection after her mother's passing. "I'm sorry for your loss," Charles said softly. Wyoming nodded once, accepting the condolence with quiet dignity. "It was 2 years ago. I've been on the move since then." The conversation shifted to safer topics after that: the weather, cattle prices, news from town. As they ate, Cora found herself watching Wyoming more closely, seeing him not just as one of Blackwell's men, but as someone who had known profound loss, just as she had. After breakfast, Wyoming helped Charles back to his bed, then turned to Cora. "I should be getting back to the Blackwell ranch. They'll be wondering where I am." "Of course," she said, following him outside. "Thank you again for your help." He saddled his horse with practiced efficiency, then paused, one hand on the saddle horn. "Miss Sullivan, Cora, I meant what I said. I'm not involved in Blackwell's land dealings. But now that I know what's happening, I'll keep my ears open. If I hear anything that might help you and your father, I'll find a way to let you know." Cora was taken aback by the offer. "Why would you do that? You barely know us." Wyoming mounted his horse, looking down at her with those clear blue eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses. "Let's just say I recognize a fighter when I see one. And I've never much cared for bullies, no matter who signs my paycheck." With that, he touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving Cora staring after him with a mixture of confusion and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. 2 weeks passed before Cora saw Wyoming again. She had almost convinced herself that his promise to help had been empty words, a kindness offered in the moment, but quickly forgotten once he returned to Blackwell's employ. She was repairing a section of fence on the western edge of their property when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Straightening, she shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun, her free hand dropping instinctively to the pistol at her hip. Relief washed over her when she recognized the rider, though she quickly tamped it down. "Mr. Tucker," she called as he drew closer. "What brings you to Sullivan Land?" Wyoming dismounted, leading his horse the last few yards. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and dust covering his clothes. "Blackwell's planning something," he said without preamble. "I thought you should know." Cora's heart sank. "What kind of something?" "He's been meeting with some rough characters, not regular ranch hands. And I overheard him talking about water rights with a man I'm pretty sure was from the territorial government." "The creek," Cora breathed. "It was their lifeblood. Without access to that water, their land would be nearly worthless." Wyoming nodded grimly. "I think he's trying to cut you off, force you to sell." "He can't do that," Cora protested. "Our water rights are legally documented. My grandfather made sure of it. Documents can be challenged, especially out here where law is still catching up to settlement." Wyoming ran a hand through his hair, dislodging dust. "Has your father still got those papers?" "In a strongbox under his bed." "What? Make copies if you can. Hide the originals somewhere safe, not in your house. And be prepared for trouble." Cora studied his face, noting the genuine concern in his eyes. "You're risking a lot to tell me this." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Like I said, I don't care for bullies. Won't Blackwell wonder where you are? I'm supposedly tracking some strays that broke through a fence." Wyoming glanced at the sun's position. "Which means I need to head back soon, preferably with a few head of cattle." Cora hesitated, then made a decision. "Come with me." She led him to a small draw where 5 of their remaining cattle grazed. "Take these," she said. "They've been wandering onto Blackwell land anyway. Might as well make it look like you've been doing your job." Wyoming looked surprised. "I can't take your cattle." "You're not taking them," Cora said firmly. "You're borrowing them to maintain your cover. I expect them returned with interest when this is all over." A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, madam." As he gathered the cattle, Cora watched him work. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident yet gentle, commanding respect from both horse and cattle with quiet authority rather than force. "Why are you really helping us?" she asked as he prepared to leave. "And don't tell me it's just because you don't like bullies." Wyoming paused, looking down at her from the saddle. For a moment, she thought he might deflect the question again, but then his expression softened. When I lost Rebecca, my fiancée, I also lost my home, my future, everything I'd planned for. I know what it's like to have something precious threatened. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can help you keep what matters to you." The raw honesty in his voice struck Cora speechless. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and rode away, driving the small herd of cattle before him. That night, as Cora sat by her father's bedside reading aloud from one of his favorite books, she found her mind wandering to Wyoming. There was something about him that kept drawing her thoughts back: his quiet strength, the sadness behind his smile, the way he'd come to warn them despite the risk to himself. "You're 1,000 miles away, girl," Charles observed, interrupting her reading. "What's troubling you?" Cora marked her place in the book and set it aside. "Wyoming Tucker came by today. He says Blackwell is planning something to do with our water rights." Charles's face darkened. "That snake. I knew he wouldn't give up easily. Wyoming suggested we make copies of our papers and hide the originals." "Good advice," Charles nodded. "And what else did Mr. Tucker have to say?" Cora hesitated. "He's putting himself at risk to help us, Pa. I can't figure out why." A knowing look crossed her father's face. "Can't you? What's that supposed to mean?" Charles reached for her hand, his grip weaker than it once was, but still reassuring. "Not every man has ulterior motives, Cora. Some are just decent folks trying to do right in a world that often rewards the opposite." "He works for Blackwell," she reminded him. "And yet he's warning us about Blackwell's plans." Charles squeezed her hand. "I've seen the way he looks at you, girl. And I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one's noticing." Heat rose to Cora's cheeks. "It's not like that." Charles chuckled. "If you say so. Now, why don't you finish that chapter?" "My old ears were enjoying the story before your mind went wandering." Cora returned to reading, but her father's words echoed in her thoughts. Was there something more to Wyoming's concern than simple decency? And why did the possibility make her heart beat faster? 3 days later, Cora was in town picking up supplies when she spotted Wyoming outside the general store. He was deep in conversation with two men she didn't recognize, hard-looking characters with the unmistakable bearing of hired guns. She ducked into the alley beside the store, not wanting to be seen. Wyoming's back was to her, but she could hear snippets of their conversation. "Tomorrow at dawn," one of the men was saying. "Blackwell wants it done clean." "And if they resist?" Wyoming asked, his voice carefully neutral. The second man laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Then it gets messy. Either way, we get paid." Cora's blood ran cold. They were talking about her ranch. They had to be. Her first instinct was to confront them, but common sense prevailed. Instead, she slipped away and hurried to finish her errands, her mind racing with plans. She was loading the last of her supplies into the wagon when a hand touched her elbow. Startled, she whirled around to find Wyoming standing there, his expression grim. "Don't react," he said quietly. "We're being watched." Cora forced a smile, as though greeting an acquaintance. "Mr. Tucker, what a surprise." "Blackwell's men are moving tomorrow at dawn," he murmured, pretending to help her with a heavy sack of flour. "They're going to dam the creek where it enters your property. Once your water's cut off, they'll come with another offer, one you won't be able to refuse if you want to keep your cattle alive." "How do you know this?" Cora asked, though she already knew the answer. "I was just briefed on it. I'm supposed to be part of the crew." His jaw tightened. "I can't stop them, but I can warn you." "What should we do?" Wyoming glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "Be ready to ride tonight. I'll meet you at the boundary line between your properties at midnight. Bring your water rights documentation." "And then what?" "Then we ride to the territorial judge in Carson City. He's an honest man I've asked around. If we can get those documents to him before Blackwell's men complete the dam, we might be able to get an injunction." Cora shook her head. "I can't leave my father. Bring him too. It's not safe for either of you to stay." The urgency in his voice convinced her more than his words. "All right, midnight at the boundary." Wyoming nodded and stepped back, raising his voice to a normal level. "Good day to you, Miss Sullivan. Safe travels back to your ranch." As he walked away, Cora couldn't help but marvel at the risks he was taking. If Blackwell discovered his betrayal, Wyoming would lose more than just his job. The hours until midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. Cora explained the situation to her father, who insisted on coming despite his weakened condition. "I'll not be driven from my land without a fight," he declared, sitting up straighter than he had in weeks. "And I'll not let you face this alone." They packed sparingly a change of clothes, some food, the precious documents, and what little money they had saved. Charles insisted on bringing his old rifle, though Cora doubted he had the strength to use it if needed. At 1:15 they set out. Charles rode Trouble, who for once seemed to sense the gravity of the situation and behaved impeccably. Cora led the way on their remaining horse, a gentle mare named Penny. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Under different circumstances, Cora might have found it beautiful. Now, each shadow seemed to hide a threat, each sound a potential warning. They reached the boundary marker, a weathered post driven into the ground years ago, just as the moon reached its zenith. Wyoming was already waiting, his horse standing patiently beside him. "You made it," he said, relief evident in his voice. Then, noticing Charles, "Mr. Sullivan, are you sure you're up for this ride? It's a good 30 miles to Carson City." Charles straightened in his saddle. "I was riding these trails when you were still in short pants, son. I'll manage." Wyoming didn't argue, simply nodding his respect. "We should move. Blackwell has men patrolling, and I'd rather not explain what I'm doing out here with the two of you." They rode in silence for the first few miles, keeping to the shadows when possible and moving at a steady pace that wouldn't tax Charles's strength. Cora found herself repeatedly glancing at Wyoming, drawing comfort from his solid presence beside them. "How did you end up working for Blackwell?" she asked eventually, keeping her voice low. Wyoming was quiet for a moment before answering. "After Rebecca died, I just rode. Didn't much care where I ended up. When I crossed into Colorado, I was nearly broke. Blackwell was hiring, no questions asked. It seemed providential at the time. And now," he looked at her, moonlight silvering his features. "Now I'm wondering if I was led here for a different reason entirely." The way he said it, the way he looked at her, sent a shiver down Cora's spine that had nothing to do with the night chill. They stopped briefly around 3 in the morning to rest the horses and check on Charles. Despite his brave front, Cora could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her father's face. "We can stop longer if you need to, Pa," she said, helping him take a drink from the canteen. "No," he said firmly. "We keep moving. I'll rest when we reach the judge." Wyoming approached, concern evident in his expression. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead. It belongs to the double our outfit good people. We could stop there for a few hours, let you rest properly." Charles started to protest, but a coughing fit overtook him. When it subsided, he looked considerably weaker. "That sounds wise," Cora said, making the decision. "Just a few hours, Pa. Then we'll continue." They reached the line shack just as the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. It was a simple one-room structure, but it offered shelter and a place for Charles to lie down properly. Wyoming quickly built a small fire in the stove while Cora helped her father onto the narrow cot. "I'll keep watch outside," Wyoming said once the fire was going. "You both should try to get some sleep." "You need rest too," Cora pointed out. He smiled tiredly. "I'll be fine. Used to going without sleep on cattle drives." Cora wanted to argue, but knew he was right. Someone needed to stay alert. "Wake me in 2 hours. I'll take the next watch." Wyoming nodded, though she suspected he had no intention of doing so. He slipped outside, leaving Cora alone with her sleeping father. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Too many thoughts churned in her mind: worry for her father, fear of losing their home, and increasingly, confusion about her feelings for Wyoming Tucker. He was risking everything to help them, and she couldn't deny the way her heart quickened whenever he was near. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke with a start to the sound of hoofbeats. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window. She'd slept far longer than the 2 hours she'd specified. Grabbing her pistol, she moved to the window, careful not to disturb her still sleeping father. Outside, Wyoming was mounted on his horse, facing 3 riders. Even from a distance, Cora recognized 2 of them as the men from town. Her blood ran cold as she realized what had happened. They'd been found. Wyoming's posture was relaxed, his hands resting casually on the saddle horn, but Cora could see the tension in his shoulders. He was saying something she couldn't hear, gesturing back the way they'd come. One of the men, a burly figure with a bushy beard, laughed and pointed at the cabin. Wyoming shook his head, his hand dropping casually closer to his sidearm. Cora eased the door open a crack, straining to hear. Telling you, I haven't seen anyone, Wyoming was saying. I'm just out tracking some strays that broke through the north fence last night. Funny coincidence, Beardy said. You being out here the same night the Sullivans disappear from their ranch. Is that so? Wyoming's voice betrayed nothing. Well, I wish them luck, wherever they've gone. Blackwell's not a man I'd want as an enemy. The third rider, who had been silent until now, spoke up. We know you've been sweet on the Sullivan girl, Tucker. Blackwell doesn't take kindly to divided loyalties. My loyalty is to my paycheck, Wyoming replied evenly. The girl's pretty, I won't deny it, but not worth losing my job over. The casual dismissal stung more than Cora expected. She reminded herself it was just an act, but doubt crept in nonetheless. What if he was playing both sides? Then you won't mind if we take a look in that cabin, Beardy said, starting to dismount. Wyoming's hand moved to his gun. I would mind, actually. I've been riding all night, and plan to get some sleep before heading back. Don't much care for company. The atmosphere tensed as the men evaluated each other. Cora raised her pistol, ready to provide backup if needed, though the thought of shooting another human being made her stomach churn. After what seemed an eternity, Beardy climbed back into his saddle. Blackwell's not going to like this, Tucker. Blackwell pays me to handle cattle, not chase after homesteaders, Wyoming replied. If he's got a problem with how I do my job, he can tell me himself. The men exchanged glances, then the leader nodded. Have it your way, but we'll be watching you. They wheeled their horses around and rode off. Wyoming remained where he was until they disappeared from sight, then quickly dismounted and hurried to the cabin. Cora met him at the door, pistol still in hand. Were they convinced? For now, Wyoming said grimly. But they'll be back, probably with more men. We need to move. Charles was awake now, sitting up on the cot. I heard, he said. How far to Carson City? About 20 miles still, Wyoming replied. If we push hard, we can make it by nightfall. They set out within minutes, riding at a faster pace now that secrecy was less important than speed. Charles was visibly struggling, but he refused to complain or slow them down. Around midday, they stopped briefly at a creek to water the horses. While Charles rested, Cora pulled Wyoming aside. Did you mean what you said to those men? About me not being worth losing your job over? Wyoming looked startled, then understanding dawned. You heard that? I did. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. Cora Sullivan, in the short time I've known you, I've come to admire your courage, your determination, and your loyalty. You are worth far more than a job, any job. The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. Impulsively, Cora reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingers. Thank you for risking everything to help us. For a moment, it seemed he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and he leaned slightly forward. Then Charles coughed, and the moment shattered. Wyoming stepped back, clearing his throat. We should keep moving. The remainder of the journey passed in a blur of dust and weariness. Charles's condition deteriorated visibly with each mile, but he stubbornly remained in the saddle through sheer force of will. They reached Carson City as the sun was setting, the small town bustling with the days and activities. Wyoming led them directly to a modest house on the outskirts. Judge Morrison lives here, he explained. He holds court in the town hall, but for urgent matters, he sometimes hears cases at home. A tall, austere man with a shock of white hair answered their knock. His stern expression softened somewhat when he saw Charles's condition. Judge Morrison, Wyoming said, my name is Wyoming Tucker. These are Charles and Cora Sullivan. They've ridden 30 miles to see you on an urgent matter of water rights and land theft. The judge studied them for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. You look like you could all use a hot meal and a place to sit while you tell me your story. Over a simple but hearty dinner prepared by the judge's housekeeper, they explained the situation. Charles produced the water rights documentation, which the judge examined carefully. These appear to be in order, he said finally. And you say Blackwell is constructing a dam as we speak? Yes, sir, Wyoming confirmed. His men plan to start at dawn today. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. That's a clear violation of territorial law. I'll issue an injunction first thing tomorrow morning and send the sheriff to enforce it. Relief washed over Cora, making her lightheaded. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet, the judge cautioned. Blackwell has influential friends. This injunction will stop the immediate threat, but you'll likely face a court battle to permanently secure your rights. We'll fight it, Charles said firmly, though his voice was barely above a whisper. The journey had taken a severe toll on him. The judge noticed. You need a doctor, Mr. Sullivan. Mrs. Fernsby, he called to his housekeeper. Please fetch Dr. Wilkins. Tell him it's urgent. While they waited for the doctor, the judge offered them rooms for the night. It's not safe for you to return until the sheriff has served the injunction. Besides, he added with a glance at Charles, I don't think your father is in any condition to travel. The doctor arrived promptly, a kind-faced man with spectacles perched on his nose. After examining Charles, he took Cora aside. Your father is very ill, Miss Sullivan. The journey here has exacerbated his condition significantly. Cora's heart sank. Will he recover? Dr. Wilkins hesitated. I won't lie to you. His lungs are badly compromised. But with proper rest and treatment, he has a chance. I'd like to move him to my clinic where I can monitor him closely. Cora nodded numbly. Of course, whatever he needs. Wyoming, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. I'll cover any expenses. That's not necessary, Cora began, but he cut her off gently. Please, let me do this. You've lost enough already. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Cora saw something in his gaze that both frightened and exhilarated her, a promise, a future, possibilities she'd thought forever closed to her. Charles was moved to the doctor's clinic that night. Cora stayed by his side, while Wyoming returned to the judge's home to help prepare the injunction paperwork. He's a good man, Charles said weakly, watching as Cora adjusted his blankets. Wyoming. Yes, he is, she agreed softly. Reminds me of myself when I was younger. A ghost of a smile crossed Charles's pale face. The way he looks at you. That's how I used to look at your mother. Tears pricked Cora's eyes. Pa, don't, let me speak, girl. I might not get another chance. Charles reached for her hand. I've watched you carry the weight of our troubles alone these past years. You've given up so much for my sake, for the ranch. Maybe it's time you thought about your own happiness. The ranch is my happiness, Cora insisted. Our home is just land and timber without love to fill it. Charles squeezed her hand weakly. Promise me you'll give him a chance. Promise me you'll at least consider the possibility of a life that includes more than just duty and struggle. Cora swallowed hard. I promise, Pa. Satisfied, Charles closed his eyes. Soon his breathing evened out into sleep, leaving Cora alone with her thoughts and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Wyoming returned near midnight, his face grim. How is he? Sleeping, Cora replied. The doctor gave him something for the pain. Wyoming nodded, pulling up a chair beside her. The injunction is ready. The sheriff and a deputy are riding out at first light. Thank you, Cora said, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of the past days settling around them like a heavy blanket. What will you do now? Cora asked eventually. You can't go back to work for Blackwell. Wyoming rubbed a hand across his tired face. No, that bridge is well and truly burned. I suppose I'll move on, find work elsewhere. The thought of him leaving created an unexpected ache in Cora's chest. You could stay, she said before she could stop herself. In Carson City, I mean, until this is all resolved. He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. And then, I don't know, she admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Wyoming reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Cora, I need to tell you something. The reason I was so willing to help you and your father, it wasn't just because it was the right thing to do. Her heart quickened. No. From the moment I saw you struggling with that stubborn mule, something in me recognized something in you. A strength, a determination I'd thought I'd never find again after Rebecca died. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm not asking for anything. I know you have your father to care for, your ranch to save. But I want you to know that if you ever need someone to lean on, not because you're not strong enough on your own, but because even the strongest shoulders get tired, I'd like to be that person. Tears welled in Cora's eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound relief she hadn't known she needed. For years, she'd carried her burdens alone, never allowing herself to admit how heavy they'd become. I'd like that, she whispered. Wyoming smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, it reached his eyes fully, crinkling the corners and lighting his face with a warmth that made Cora's breath catch. The next morning brought both good and bad news. The sheriff returned from delivering the injunction to report that Blackwell's men had indeed begun constructing a dam, but work had been halted upon receipt of the court order. However, Blackwell himself had been furious, vowing to fight the injunction with every resource at his disposal. He's threatened to bring in more men, the sheriff told Judge Morrison. Says he won't be dictated to by some backwater judge and a dying homesteader. The judge's face darkened. We'll see about that. I've already telegraphed the territorial governor about this situation. Blackwell may have friends in high places, but so do I. Cora listened to this exchange with a mixture of hope and dread. The immediate threat to their water had been averted, but the battle was far from over. More concerning was her father's condition. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Charles had taken a turn for the worse overnight. His breathing was labored, and fever had set in. I've seen this before, Dr. Wilkins told Cora gently. The body can only take so much strain. The journey here may have been too much. But the medicine from town was helping, Cora protested. Temporarily, the doctor explained. Your father's illness is progressive. The medicine eases the symptoms but can't cure the underlying condition. Cora felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. She'd known, of course, that her father was gravely ill, but some part of her had always believed that if they could just hold on to the ranch, just get him the right treatment, he would recover. Wyoming found her on the clinic's small porch, staring blankly at the street. Without a word, he sat beside her and took her hand. The doctor says he's dying, she said, her voice hollow. All this the fight for the water rights, the ranch it was to give him a future. What's the point now? The point is that it mattered to him, Wyoming replied softly. That land represents his life's work, his legacy to you. Fighting for it honors that, regardless of the outcome. Cora turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. When did you get so wise? A sad smile touched his lips. Grief teaches hard lessons. She leaned against him then, allowing herself the comfort of his strength. He put his arm around her shoulders, and they sat together in silence as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Later that day, Judge Morrison visited the clinic with news. The governor has responded to my telegram. He's sending a water rights commissioner to investigate the situation personally. This is good, Cora. It means Blackwell can't simply bully his way through this. How long will that take? She asked. A week, perhaps 2. The judge glanced toward Charles's room. How is your father? Holding on, she said simply. The judge nodded, understanding the unspoken message. I'll expedite matters as much as possible. Over the next few days, Cora barely left her father's bedside. Wyoming divided his time between helping the judge prepare their case and sitting with her, sometimes talking, sometimes just providing silent companionship. On the 4th day, Charles rallied enough to speak clearly for the first time since their arrival. Cora, girl, he called weakly. And Wyoming. Come here, both of you. They approached the bed, Cora taking her father's hand, while Wyoming stood respectfully at the foot. I want to say something while I still can, Charles said, each word clearly an effort. Wyoming, you've proven yourself a man of honor. More than that, you've shown a kindness to strangers that's rare in this world. Sir, Wyoming began, but Charles raised a hand to stop him. Let me finish. My Cora is the most precious thing in my life. Has been since the day she was born. Watching her grow into the strong, capable woman she is has been my greatest joy. He paused, gathering strength. But I've also watched her sacrifice her own happiness for my sake, for the ranch. That's not what I wanted for her. Cora's eyes filled with tears. Pa, please, I've seen how you two look at each other, Charles continued. Reminds me of how her mother and I were. That kind of connection doesn't come along often in a lifetime. He fixed Wyoming with a penetrating gaze. Do you care for my daughter? Wyoming straightened, meeting the older man's eyes directly. Yes, sir. More than I thought possible after losing Rebecca. Charles nodded, satisfied. And you, Cora? What do you feel for this man? Cora looked at Wyoming, really looked at him, the quiet strength in his bearing, the kindness in his eyes, the way he'd risked everything to help them when he barely knew them. In the short time she'd known him, he'd become someone she trusted implicitly, someone whose presence brought her comfort even in the darkest moments. I care for him, she admitted softly. Very much. A smile transformed Charles's haggard face. Then I can go peacefully, knowing you won't be alone. Don't talk like that, Cora protested. You're going to get better. But they all knew it wasn't true. Charles Sullivan was fading, his life's energy ebbing away like a receding tide. I want you to have the ranch, Cora, he said. It's yours by right. Fight for it if you can. But if the fight becomes too costly, remember that land is just dirt and timber. It's the people who matter. He reached for Wyoming's hand, placing it atop Cora's. Promise me you'll look after each other, whatever comes. I promise, Wyoming said solemnly. I promise too, Pa. Cora whispered, tears streaming down her face. Charles smiled again, then closed his eyes. Good. That's good. He slipped into unconsciousness after that, his breathing growing shallower as the hours passed. Cora remained by his side, Wyoming a steady presence beside her. Just before dawn the next morning, Charles Sullivan took his last breath, slipping away peacefully in his sleep. Cora wept in Wyoming's arms, grief and exhaustion finally overwhelming her. The funeral was held 2 days later, a simple ceremony attended by Judge Morrison, Dr. Wilkins, and a few townspeople who had come to know Cora during her stay. Wyoming stood beside her throughout, a solid anchor in the storm of her grief. As they walked back from the cemetery, Cora spoke for the first time since her father's passing. I still want to fight for the ranch. Not just for Pa now, but for myself. For the future. Wyoming nodded. Then we'll fight. She looked up at him. If you'll have me, he said simply. I meant what I promised your father. I want to be there for you, Cora. Not because you need me, you're the strongest person I've ever met, but because I need you. You've brought something back to life in me that I thought died with Rebecca. Cora stopped walking, turning to face him fully. I'm not looking to replace what you lost, Wyoming. I know that, he said earnestly. And I'm not trying to replace what you've lost either. We're both shaped by our grief, but we don't have to be defined by it. She studied his face, seeing the sincerity there, the hope, the affection that had been growing between them since that first day on the trail. I'd like you to stay, she said finally, to help me fight for the ranch, and to see where this leads. The smile that lit his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. Tentatively, he reached out and touched her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Then, slowly enough that she could have pulled away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, tender, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Cora felt something settle in her heart, not an end to her grief, but a beginning of something new alongside it. The Water Rights Commissioner arrived the following week, a no-nonsense man named Peterson who listened carefully to both sides of the dispute. Blackwell arrived with a lawyer from Denver, confident in his ability to sway the proceedings in his favor. This is nothing but a delaying tactic, Blackwell declared during the hearing. The Sullivan girl can't possibly maintain that ranch on her own. I'm offering fair market value out of the goodness of my heart. This Sullivan girl has a name, Cora said firmly, rising to her feet. And I've been running that ranch for the past 3 years while my father was ill. I'm more than capable of continuing to do so. The commissioner studied the water rights documentation, comparing it with maps of the area. These papers appear to be in order, Mr. Blackwell. The Sullivan claim predates yours by a considerable margin. Papers can be forged, Blackwell's lawyer suggested smoothly. Are you accusing Miss Sullivan of forgery? Judge Morrison asked sharply. That's a serious allegation. The lawyer backpedaled quickly, simply pointing out possibilities, Your Honor. Wyoming, who had been sitting quietly beside Cora, spoke up. If I may, Commissioner, I worked for Mr. Blackwell until recently. I personally overheard him discussing plans to dam the creek specifically to force the Sullivans to sell. He was quite explicit about his intentions. Blackwell's face purpled with rage. You treacherous! Watch yourself, Blackwell. The sheriff warned from his position by the door. The commissioner held up a hand for silence. I've heard enough. Based on the documentation provided and the testimony given, it's clear that the Sullivan water rights are legally valid and must be respected. Mr. Blackwell, you are hereby ordered to cease any and all attempts to interfere with the creek's natural flow where it crosses Sullivan property. Relief washed over Cora. It wasn't a complete victory. Blackwell still owned the surrounding land and would likely continue his pressure tactics, but it was enough for now. As they left the town hall, Blackwell intercepted them, his face twisted with anger. "This isn't over, girl. And you, Tucker, you'll regret crossing me." Wyoming stepped slightly in front of Cora, his posture deceptively relaxed. "Threatening a witness is unwise, Blackwell. Especially with the sheriff standing right there." The sheriff had indeed followed them out, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. Blackwell glared at them all, then stormed off toward the saloon, his lawyer hurrying to keep up. "He won't give up easily," Wyoming said quietly as they walked back to their lodgings. "I know," Cora replied. "But neither will I." They returned to the Sullivan Ranch the next day, Judge Morrison having assured them that the injunction would remain in force until a permanent ruling could be issued by the territorial court. As they crested the final hill and the small cabin came into view, Cora felt a bittersweet pang. This was home, the only home she'd ever known, but it would never be the same without her father. Wyoming seemed to sense her thoughts. "We can make some improvements, if you'd like. The roof could use some work, and maybe expand the cabin a bit." Cora asked, glancing at him. He looked suddenly uncertain. "I mean, if you want me to stay, I could work as your hired hand, help get the place back on its feet." Cora smiled, reaching over to take his hand. "I think we both know you'd be more than a hired hand, Wyoming Tucker." Hope dawned in his eyes. "What would I be, then?" "A partner," she said simply. "In all things, if that's what you want." Instead of answering with words, Wyoming swung down from his horse and lifted Cora from her saddle. With her feet barely touching the ground, he kissed her, not the gentle, tentative kiss of before, but one filled with promise and passion and a future unfolding before them. When they finally parted, breathless, Wyoming rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this again," he murmured. "After Rebecca, I was just existing. Then I saw you struggling with that mule, and something woke up inside me." Cora smiled, remembering that day that now seemed so long ago. "You took the rope and gave me strength to lean on when I needed it most. And you gave me a reason to stop running," he replied. "A reason to build something new instead of just mourning what I'd lost." They rode the final distance to the cabin together, their horses side by side, hands occasionally reaching across the space between them as if neither could quite believe the other was real. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm of work and rebuilding. Wyoming brought his few possessions from town, setting them up in the barn while insisting that Cora keep the cabin to herself. "It's not proper otherwise," he explained when she protested. "At least not until." He trailed off, but Cora understood. Though their feelings for each other were clear, they were both traditional enough to want to do things in the right order. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Wyoming took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "About us. About the future." Cora turned to him, heart quickening. "Oh, I know it hasn't been that long, and if you think it's too soon, I understand completely. But I've lived enough to know that when something is right, it's right." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Cora Sullivan. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you with that mule, and every day since has only made me more certain." Tears pricked Cora's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too, Wyoming. I think maybe I have since you first took that rope from my hands." His smile was radiant as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. "This was my mother's," he explained, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "I've carried it with me since I left Texas. I thought I might sell it when times got tough, but I never could bring myself to part with it. Now I know why." He slid from the porch swing onto one knee before her. "Cora Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to be your strength when you need it, and to love you for all the days of my life." "Yes," Cora whispered, tears flowing freely now. "Yes, Wyoming Tucker, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, sealing their promise as the last rays of sunlight gilded them in golden light. They were married 2 weeks later in Carson City, Judge Morrison officiating the simple ceremony. Dr. Wilkins attended, along with a few townspeople who had become friends during their time there. The sheriff served as Wyoming's best man, having developed a grudging respect for the cowboy during their confrontation with Blackwell. As they exchanged vows, Cora felt her father's presence strongly, as if he were standing beside her, giving his blessing. When Wyoming slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join the engagement ring, she knew with absolute certainty that this was right, that this was what her father had wanted for her all along. They returned to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, the future stretching before them like the wide, open plains, full of challenges, certainly, but also full of promise and hope. Wyoming carried her across the threshold of the cabin, setting her down gently in what was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Tucker," he said softly. "Home," Cora repeated, looking around the simple cabin with new eyes. "It feels different somehow. Because now it's just the beginning," Wyoming said, drawing her into his arms. "Not the end of something, but the start of everything." In the years that followed, they built a life together that was both harder and more rewarding than either could have imagined. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts, slowly expanding as they added more cattle and improved the land. Blackwell continued his campaign of pressure for a time, but his influence waned after the territorial governor, impressed by Judge Morrison's account of the situation, launched an investigation into his business practices. Eventually, he sold his holdings and moved east, leaving the Tuckers to work their land in peace. Their first child, a son they named Charles Wyoming Tucker, arrived a year after their wedding, bringing a joy that neither had thought possible. A daughter, Rebecca Marie, followed 2 years later, her name a tribute to the woman Wyoming had loved and lost. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they sat together on the expanded porch of what was now a comfortable 2-story home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. "Did you ever imagine this?" Cora asked, her head resting on Wyoming's shoulder. "That day when you found me struggling with that mule?" Wyoming chuckled, the sound vibrating pleasantly against her cheek. "Can't say that I did. I just saw a pretty girl who needed help with a stubborn animal. And now look at us," she said, gesturing to their home, their land, their children. "All because you stopped to help a stranger. Best decision I ever made," Wyoming said, turning to kiss her softly. "Taking that rope from your hands was the beginning of everything good in my life." Cora smiled, thinking of the long journey that had brought them here, the struggles, the loss, the love that had sustained them through it all. "And giving me your strength to lean on was the beginning of everything good in mine." As twilight deepened into dusk, Wyoming Tucker held his wife close, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering darkness, and knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found what he'd been searching for since leaving Texas, not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. And Cora, feeling the solid warmth of her husband beside her, the sounds of their children's laughter in the air, understood at last what her father had meant. The land, the ranch, they mattered, yes, but it was the love that filled it that made it truly home.